I think it's going to be a fantastic ETF. And I think I can safely say, because it's going to be out in the next couple of days, that it's going to be the first one in the world. So I think that's going to be a fantastic achievement, really.
Hello, you're watching Proactive. Joining me is Hun ETF co-CEO Hector McNeil. Hector, very good to speak with you. And you're about to launch the Future of Defense Indo-Pacific ex-China UCITS ETF. Why specifically targeted at this region?
Hi, Stephen. Good to see you again. Yeah, it's an easy question, actually. You probably know we've had marvelous success with our future global defense, NATO, which is just a touch under $3 billion of assets now. You're one of the best performing ETFs in the world this year, ticker NATO. And then we brought out the European defense story, which is the same concept, future of defense as well. So cyber and industrials and tickers Army and Navy. And we just felt that the next stage of this sort of global macro story is going to be the US regime, Trump, etc., putting pressure on their Asian allies, A, to step up against China, and B, to spend more on defense. He's very much used, the same rhetoric on Japan and South Korea, in terms of the money that US has to spend defending them. So I think that sort of 3.5 to 5% story is going to be exactly the same for Asia as it is, for Europe. And then add to that, in recent times, obviously you've had the Pakistan, India fracas, stroke mini war, and at the moment you've got the Thai and Cambodians fighting each other, and then you've seen the aggressiveness of China in the China Straits, and also buzzing the coast of Australia. So I think there's a lot of things going on there that just mean that's the next story in this sort of 10, 20-year defense ramp up that we're going to see. So I think it's going to be a fantastic ETF. And, I think, I can safely say, because it's going to be out in the next couple of days, that it's going to be the first one in the world. So I think that's going to be a fantastic achievement, really.
Hector, is there evidence that countries in the region are starting to increase their defense spending?
Yeah, no, there is. I mean, India in particular has seen huge growth. Some stocks rising 500%, but Australia, Korea, Japan, all these areas are definitely already in the game. But coming further, we've seen the AUKUS development with Australia, UK, and the US on atomic submarines. For the Australasia protection. But you're seeing this across the board. You're seeing even Japan changing its statutes from only being able to have a defensive capability to being able to be offensive as well. I mean, Japan's got the third largest navy in the world. If you think about it, it's got North Korea, Russia, and China all within its sphere there. So I think there's already significant interest in there. I mean, funny enough, some of the most interesting stocks in NATO is South Korean stocks and some Japanese stocks in there. So I think it's already a theme which I think is resonating. But I do think it's because a lot of investors are going to say, well, look, is there any value left in the defence play? There's been a lot of money go into it. There's been a lot of rise in valuations. But I think if there is value and valuation opportunity, it is in Asia. So we're very focused on that Indo-Pacific area. We think, funny enough, I think if this had been out when the India Pakistan story came along, you would have seen, probably a couple of billion go into this product, within a week, because of that, So, I always say we're only one macro event away from significant assets. I mean, you probably don't know this thing, but I'm a massive rugby league fan, and this story is even resonating into the rugby league arena. I don't know if you know, but the biggest rugby league competition in the world is the National Rugby League in Australia, the NRL, and just recently they've okayed an extension of a team to Papua New Guinea, and the Australian government is underwriting that by $600 million over 10 years. And the reason they're doing this is it's soft power to counter the threat of China influence on Papua New Guinea. So the Australians are using sport as a way to, because obviously it's a resource-rich country, very close to Australia. So this is definitely a situation that's going on here and now. So it's really interesting.
Well, difficult to include rugby league in the index, but you mentioned some of the interesting components of NATO. Tell us some of the companies that are included in Quad.
Yeah, good question. That I mean, there's some really interesting companies, across that sort of spectrum I talked about before: South Korea, Japan, Australia. Companies like Hanwha Aerospace, Korea Aerospace. I mean, big companies you already know about like Mitsubishi, Kawasaki. But even British Aerospace Australia. Which is part owned by Thales and also by BA Systems. So there's some really interesting companies, even Hanwha Aerospace, which I think is one of the most interesting companies, not just in Asia from a defense perspective, but globally. So I think there's going to be a ton of interesting businesses there. And then you've got some of the more interesting newer ones, which people might not be so au fait with, like Austal Limited in Australia, so a shipbuilder, both in the US and Australia. Drone Shield, which says what it is on the tin, and that's going to become a much more bigger area. And Codan Limited. So there's a ton of companies that are going to be additive to your basket, of defence stocks in this area. And interestingly, some of the Australian stocks have only seen a modest rise in market cap and valuation, over this time. So we think there's a huge amount of growth potential in that area. So really, really excited about this launch.
Well, I mean, you recently passed the second anniversary of NATO, and you talked a bit about the success of NATO. Do you think you can replicate that with Quad?
Yeah, I'm not sure it'll be quite as big, but you never know, right? I mean, there's a competitor of ours, brought a European ETF, just beat us by a few weeks, actually, European defence, and they're over 3.5 billion in that now. Being a fantastic achievement as that product. So I think there's equally the chance that, as I say, it's a geopolitical play at the end of the day, a great hedge for that sort of scenario, and because it's I believe focused on the countries that are in our value belief system, and counters to China, and obviously NATO's a counter to Russia, etc. I think that as I say, we're only one big event away from there being a bunch of assets going into that. But I think there will be, we built quite a lot of interest. I think we sent a series of nurture emails out over the past couple of weeks saying this is coming, and we've got over 1,000 people signed up to get information on it. That's usually a really good sign that there's going to be some good flows going into that day one. So I think it could be very, and I think being first, Stephen, in the ETF world is really important. And for this, as I mentioned, we were only 3 or 4 weeks behind our competitor, and we're at a couple of 100 million in that space. They're at 3.5 billion in Europe, even though I think ours is a better product. And I think we by being first here, we can sort of capture the lion's share of money in this space. So it should be. And also, I think what's really cool as well is we'll have the most complete platform in the defence space. We'll have that global product, we'll have that European product, and we'll have the Asia, the Indo-Pac ex China. So I think that's going to be good for clients as well, where they can basically have more surgical allocation, or they can be more general and more global. So I think all of them have really good case studies, which I think people will be very happy to look at.
Hector, congratulations on the launch of Quad. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thanks, Stephen. Always a pleasure.
Hector McNeil, the co-CEO of Hun ETF.